right, so we've got basic coverage of glaze on here, but there's some other things you can do as well. For example, I've got this piece that I just glazed, or actually this one's going to be easier to hold. I'm going to do a rim dip on this, and a rim dip is just a decorative dip. I'm just sticking just the rim in, and what I've got now is these two glazes reacting or overlapping one another. And so where the two glazes meet, where they overlap, they're going to have eutectics, they're going to react to each other, and that rim is going to be a slightly different color than the rest of it. You can layer, so you are allowed to layer, for example, on this one I've got 2 layers of glaze all the way through in that middle section. You really don't want more than 2 layers of glaze at the bottom of a piece, but up on the top or even in the middle you can do a little bit more than that. I'm also going to scoop up a little bit of this glaze. You might want to work with more than 2 glazes, but that's what I have mixed up already. And I can do a little decoration, little drips and things like that inside. And that extra layer of glaze can react. On the inside, it's an easy layering because you know it's not going to be too thick. It's not going to run down the side. I'd be leery of adding too much glaze at the bottom. You can also, sometimes people do actually I'm going to do it on this one here where I've got all these things going on. Sometimes people intentionally cause a few drips to run down. If you want drips, I would recommend that you do it intentionally, like this, because if you do a rim dip and then flip it over, the drips kind of run sideways and they look a little messy when you start to do that. So you can do rim dips, you can do little decorations and things like that. You can also use a paintbrush. However, I have some warnings for you. So if you are a hand builder, sometimes you get a piece that no longer fits in your bucket. Doesn't fit very well in the bucket to add glaze. There's a couple ways you can deal with that. One is to use a sprayer, which we'll do later. But the other is to apply glaze with a paintbrush, particularly if you're applying it in just sections. But here are some risks, all right? If I take a paintbrush and brush this down the side, see what's happening with each of these brushes? The first time I put it on, it's fairly thick. By the time I get to the end, it gets kind of thin. The shape and the texture of this particular piece exacerbate that, but it can show up as really a mistake in glazing. If you want to paint it on, I recommend you get a brush that's got some thickness to it, and you have a little cup of the glaze like I've got here, and you keep layering these brush strokes over one another. In fact, I like to come back through and sort of crisscross my brush strokes, and that way you get enough thickness on there. Most people who have dripping problems have them when they dip. Most of the time when you're brushing it on, the problem people have is not getting it thick enough. So just kind of being aware of those two differences. Now the other thing I wanted to show you in terms of cleanup and stuff is what to do if you've got some glaze on the bottom. So I've got a little cup of water here, and I'm simply going to wipe up these little drips of glaze. Now, I want to make sure that I'm clean about 1/4 of an inch up all the way on the outside, but also on the inside. So if I've got a little foot ring here, and I've got some glaze inside of that foot ring, it's going to potentially run down. If you've got a piece like this one here, where there's no clear bottom, right, this piece ends, you're going to have to get your eyes down here and look at where that 1/4 of an inch is. This would actually be a good shape to use the wax on, but if you forgot to use the wax, you can do this. It's a little annoying, right? It's not as much fun, and it's not as fast, but it's doable. You can make this work. So I'm just brushing this glaze off. Notice I'm wearing gloves. If you're going to wash the glaze with a sponge and you're going to be getting a lot of it on you, you should probably wear gloves. Let's keep yourself safe. Now, I've cleaned up most of the bottom here, but when I set it on the table, or if I set it on my hand up here where you can see it a little bit better, I've got glaze that comes all the way to that bottom edge. I'm going to have to keep cleaning up a little bit higher all the way around, or I'm going to risk that glaze moving down the side of the pot and sticking to the shelf. 1/4 of an inch is our rule in the studio, all the way around on all of the pieces, regardless of what shape it is. And wax is a good way to do that, but it's not the only way to do that. Now, what if I had not cleaned up the bottom and I had just added wax right over the top? What if I think, oh shoot, I forgot to use wax on this piece, and then go stick wax on? That's a really bad idea, because what's going to happen is I'm going to trap that glaze under the wax. It's going to be hard to get off. But in the firing, the wax is going to burn off early, and then the glaze is going to melt, and it's going to stick to the shelf. So that's really bad news. Use a sponge, clean it up. Wax is optional, and that's part of the reason why wax is optional, is I don't want you guys coming back through later on and causing more of a mess by trapping the glaze underneath. All right? In the next video, I'll show you a few other ways to do some cleanup on some of your pieces. Thank you.